One key part of population trend is population growth, and most importantly, the problematic behind the disparity found between developed regions and industrialized regions that, as seen by the chart, the gap continues growing.
This gap, while mostly economical as represented by the difference in GDP between the two different type of nations, which can be also seen by the graph, can also be analyzed through population trends, as they can cause this disparity between GDPs and thus this gap between developed and developing nations.
So what happens if we continue growing at the rate we're growing in the present? Then the English economist called Thomas Matthews in the 1800s stated that food grows arithmetic and population grows exponentially. This means that in the future there will be not enough food resources for the amount of people in the present. So here we have an example where these balls are the people and these toys are the food. And we will start with two of a kind. But what happens if we increase? Then food will grow four, but food will food will also grow four, but population four. But as it increases exponentially. So this means that food will a population will have 16, while food will only have 6 because it adds 6 times each time.
So here we have an example based on a theory, but other scientists have different theories. Some say that this theory is completely wrong because with new technologies developing in the future that will increase food production, this will not be a problem.
But what you're saying is valid, but if it was true, then in the present world, examples like Africa, for example, and countries like Tanzania, there wouldn't be thousands of people starving of hunger, and well, at such increasing population rate. Furthermore, this graph supports Matthew's theory as it shows a food shortage in the future while population continues growing exponentially.
This food shortage comes in part due to the fact that by 2050 there will be 9 billion people on the planet and demand for food will have increased by 70%. This demand must be met despite flatlining yields, increasing water scarcity, and growing competition over land. As currently projected, the food production in order to satisfy this demand will not be possible, causing this shortage and, as a result, hunger and famine across the world. So, what causes this increase in population trends? Well, one thing is the TRF, or the average number of children per woman. Another thing is the life expectancy. Currently, we can see how the countries with a lower TFR are the ones that are more economically developed and have a higher GDP, as seen by the graph. But also, the majority of the countries are still have a high TRF, meaning that their population growth is still growing annually, and due to it, it's hard for these countries to economically develop and catch up to those who already have a lower TFR and a high GDP, thus causing the disparity between developed and developing nations. So, starting with the TRF, we can see in the graph the number of babies per woman in the y-axis, while in the x-axis we have population growth. The different sheets of colors represent the total GDP. As it gets more pink, it means that it has a higher GDP. The trends shown in the graph throughout time show that a decrease in the TRF creates a decrease in the population growth and as a result a higher GDP, as shown by all the different countries going down and then turning more pink as they do so. To highlight the problematics behind a high TRF, we can analyze two nations, Tanzania and Spain. Tanzania is considered an underdeveloped nation, while Spain is considered industrialized. In 2012, we can see that their population was fairly similar, but there is a huge disparity in their projected population for 2015. Tanzania's population is almost doubling, while Spain only grew about 2 million people. One of the factors that causes disparity is the TRF, which is seen in the chart. For Tanzania, it is 5.1, while for Spain is 1.4. Going back to the previous chart, we can see how this disparity also accounts for the economical growth and development that can happen in a nation. A higher TRF means a lower GDP, as seen by the bubble chart before.
Okay, so the map shows the total number fertility rate in the world, and in the future it shows if the country chooses to have more babies because of the population problems we will have in the future.
The map also highlights how African nations are the last ones to turn blue, showing the disparity between developed and developing countries. So, how do we keep TRFs low? The perfect number most economists agree upon is 2.1, but it's a hard number to reach as people want kids. So, what are countries doing to actually stop an increase in TRF? Countries such as France and Norway are doing social programs to support families, such as generous maternity leave and subsidies for childcare. Another great initiative is Planned Parenthood, which is important in the United States. Another solution only one country has adopted is China's one-child policy. Even though successful in keeping TRFs low, it has caused a huge gender gap that weakens the argument for the implementation of such policy. Similarly, we can see the relationship between life expectancy and total GDP. As life expectancy is higher, we see a larger development of GDP, which also highlights the gap between developed nations and developing nations, as most of the nations depicted are not pink but orange or green, thus meaning that they are developing nations, and highlighting this disparity. Next, we can see the life expectancy on the y-axis, while the population growth is on the x-axis. And once again, the pink shading means there's a more gross domestic product growth over time. With the life expectancy, we can see how as it rises, population growth decreases and the GDP increases. We can see this by nations turning more pink as they go up and further to the left. What this shows is that life expectancy is a factor for population trends as it affects the population rate, and as population growth increases, GDP decreases. In order to increase the life expectancy, countries and governments have created a focus on healthcare, creating programs in order to make healthcare free for everybody, thus increasing the life expectancy rate. Another point in which governments have been focusing on is security. By increasing in those two areas, the life expectancy will grow in the future, and as a result, the countries will experience further economic growth. So overall, the population trends that we are seeing show that an increasing population, especially in less developed countries, means lower GDP. But by implementing controls over the TRF as well as increasing the life expectancy, population growth in the long run will decrease as seen in the graph. First, it will start with developed nations and then less developed nations will follow. Thus, bridging the gap between more developed countries and less developed countries that we saw at the beginning and was a result of the population trends we explained previously.